History. We need to talk about history, don't we? So we are talking about World War II, and this is chapter 23, I think. I don't know. But let me pull up the weekly questions and it'll say on there which chapter it is. So weekly questions. Go. 22. Sorry. 22. So we're doing 22, 23, 24, and 25 with this unit. So some of these look like kind of soft questions, I think. But remember that what I'm looking for is some specific detail. So this one in particular, I think, looks a little weak because it just says World War II is often referred to as the Good War. Evaluate that title. Is it appropriate? Why or why not? So I don't want you just to get on and go like, nah, World War II was good. And you know it was because we defeated Hitler at the end. Talk about the things that were good that happened. Clearly winning the war was good. Clearly liberating concentration camps was good. But there are going to be some other things that come out of this as a result that are probably good. There's probably some things that happen in it that are bad as well. So you could talk about both good and bad things, but be specific, name names, talk about battles, talk about laws, whatever, specific stuff. But this gives you a lot of choice about what you want to talk about. If I were you, I'd definitely pick some things from the book, you know, because that's sort of a sign to me that you looked at the book. And, specific to the United States, if you could, because it's U.S. history. All right. And then the second question is about the Cold War, freedom versus slavery, that sort of thing. And that kind of goes along with the idea of Foner's theme throughout the different chapters of liberty, hence the title of the book, Give Me Liberty. So he talks about what is liberty and freedom to different people at different times. And of course, we're going to, really pit the United States and the Soviet Union as a global battle for good versus evil. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. Sorry. Global battle of good versus evil, with, of course, the United States being good and the Soviet Union being evil, that sort of thing. Freedom and slavery, democracy versus totalitarian government. And to a certain extent, that's true, and to a certain extent, it's not. And I think it gets tricky. You know, when I was a kid 100 years ago, because I'm 100, all of our textbooks really talked about how the Soviet Union was completely evil, nothing good came from communism, that sort of thing, because that's, it's just the way that old historians kind of felt. Then we had that new group of historians that were kind of trained up when I was a kid, which is Vietnam and Watergate. And as you can imagine, no one trusted anything ever about the United States during that era. So you have a generation of historians like, no, the United States lied, the Soviet Union wasn't bad at all, and really, we started this and we made up this war so that we could expand the military industrial complex, and the Soviet Union was really a victim of all this stuff. Okay, that's probably too much as well. And I do think that you find a little balance, with more modern historians who will point out that, anybody who argues the Soviet Union wasn't really bad is not paying attention to who Joseph Stalin was. Because if you disagreed with him, he had you killed. Now, to me, that's bad. We all define good and bad differently, but you disagree with me and I have you killed, I think that's bad. However, maybe the average standard of living increased, or literacy. I mean, you see that a little in Cuba, and healthcare, general healthcare might be better, unless you disagree with Stalin and then you're dead. And what people will point out quite a bit during the Cold War in the United States, who really liked communist socialist theory, is that there's less discrimination against people of different races or ethnicities. It's like, no, because they're discriminating by ideology. So they just picked a different way to discriminate, but I don't know. Yeah, Khrushchev's kind of the kinder, gentler communist in some ways, but what you have to remember about Khrushchev, well, you don't have to, you do whatever you want. But Khrushchev is the guy who carried out the purges for Stalin. And as soon as Stalin died, Khrushchev said, by the way, there were a bunch of purges, that was all Stalin. So I think his rule was definitely more peaceful in some ways, and they were more prosperous at that point. But the stuff he'd done to get to that point was pretty heinous. So, but I get what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing with the Soviet Union during that era probably being a better place. However, I also have some pretty good friends from Albania, which was controlled first by the Nazis and then by the Soviets. So, you know, that's just a bad 50 or 60 years for you. And I've never seen a more pro-American, USA is perfect guy in my entire life, you know, than this fellow who emigrated from Albania and lived there during Soviet occupation. So I think the smaller satellite countries that were taken over by the Soviet Union, people who lived in those may have had a different experience. Yeah. I completely agree with what you're saying about compared to Stalin and Lenin. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. And no, these are good points. I'm not trying to take away from them at all, I promise. I feel like I'm apologizing a lot. I just got a whole bunch of really negative emails about soccer, and it's like, oh my gosh. So I'm not trying to be disagreeable. Yeah. But your points are really good. All right, question number 3. Sorry, I didn't mean to take that long talking about question 2. The Cold War, I think, is one of the weirdest, most confusing things in US history. We've got this strange ideological conflict that's mixed in with, you know, they call it a Cold War because we don't officially fight, but we sure blow up 2 or 3 or 4 countries in the process that aren't the United States and the Soviet Union. It's kind of a mess. But no, there's a whole lot of buts in there. Civil rights movement gaining momentum in the 50s after Reconstruction, and why? And I think that will be, you know, you'll talk about court cases, the effects of World War II, desegregation of the military and other institutions, the court case primarily Brown versus Board of Education, civil rights movement, maybe northern and southern version. The book does make a little distinction between the two. We tend to learn more about the southern version for a variety of reasons, most of them good. One, we're more southern than northern, you probably noticed, because it's still hot and October's almost over. More African Americans lived in the South even after a bunch of folks relocating for war jobs. And reason number 3, Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, you know, he's the leader of Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the major organization behind the structure of the civil rights movement. Now, Malcolm X is more the northern dude in the civil rights movement. Also, you know, he's the by any means necessary, and he seems, you know, a little more strident. I don't know if that's the right word. Plus, you know, there's the whole Baptist versus Muslim thing, and okay. But civil rights movement, 50s, why in the 50s why was the 50s the right time for that? So I think that's a fascinating discussion. Of course, I do love history more than the average person. And number 4, were we more free and open and tolerant in the 60s or not? And of course, on questions like that, the answer is always yes and no. So yes and no. But I do think, you don't have to agree with me, of course. I do think that over time, almost always the US consistently becomes more open and more free. But you've also, that Cold War thing kind of messes with us a little bit in that era, because we're going to be more open and tolerant of stuff unless we think it's communist. And if we can affiliate or associate the civil rights movement or something else we don't like with communism, that's naturally going to denigrate it. All right, I know that's way more talking about the weekly questions than you wanted, but you got it. It's like a bonus for you. All right. So, sorry, I was looking at my cereal boxes. I noticed there's one fewer cereal box. It's very exciting. All right. Let's talk about the notes and World War II, and not cereal boxes. Somebody got really angry with me that I didn't have a background, made some snide comment about it. If you guys want, I can get a background. I have them. Got a really nice one, US flag. Then somebody told me I should get a Texas flag. Can't ever make anybody happy, can you? Or everybody. You can always make somebody happy. During World War II, not very many people were happy. That's my segue. FDR might have been happy because he got elected to 4 terms, but he probably wasn't happy about the reason that he felt like it was okay to run so many times. Of course, we have moved from the Great Depression to a global conflict. So you got a couple of rough decades here. So your super old relatives, crowd at this point, that'd be your great-grandparents, if they're still around, who lived through this stuff. Those folks are tough. I'm just saying. Okay. All right. The book chapter starts off with a discussion of the 4 freedoms and depictions of those Norman Rockwell photos, paintings, drawings. I think they're drawings. Might be paintings, lithographs, whatever, of the 4 freedoms. And the 4 freedoms are supposed to be human freedoms, human rights, essential human rights, which are freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. And that really does sound nice, doesn't it? And this is kind of a predecessor to the UN, thank you for the help there on the painting, UN Declaration of Rights. Before we have the UN, they actually start talking about creating the UN. I think it is, I know that it is, in 41. So, you know, they realized that the League of Nations didn't work very well because people felt a little more like it was optional because, you know, I suppose everything in life, almost everything in life is optional. So they're trying to create an organization that will essentially require all of the major nations to participate. And they're also going to start thinking about how when the war is over, that whether the nation was an aggressor nation or not, that they need to have some role, some participation in this international organization moving forward to hold them accountable, but also make them a part of solutions, not problems, that sort of thing. But of course, after a certain appropriate amount of time, and I don't know that punishment is the right word, but certainly punishment or penalty or change, I suppose. All of those things which will seem important toward Japan and Germany and Italy, although Italy had their own kind of revolution there and took care of it themselves, as they kind of did during World War I. Because I don't know why, that's what Italy does. Okay, so this World War II U.S. participation is going to be important. There's no way around it and shouldn't be any way around it. I always would tell my high school folks that if you ever go visit Europe, because, you know, I taught at kind of a fancy high school, maybe some of you went there, kind of a fancy one, where kids typically had 3 or 4 vacations a year. I never had a vacation as a kid. We always went to see my grandparents or something. But, you know, sometimes people are poor. But these folks would pretty regularly go to Europe or overseas somewhere, you know, once a year. And I would tell them, when you go to Europe, that T-shirt that says USA 2-0 in World Wars, don't take that T-shirt with you. That's not, that perspective is not going to be very well received by our European friends. And sometimes I think, especially younger students, and then like, you know, older rah-rah kind of people like Go Team, and I think the United States is great. I can't think of another place I'd rather live permanently. Visiting places might be fun, but I like the United States. Does not mean that I think that everything we've ever done is good and that our presence in world wars is what automatically brought them to a close. So one of the things we'll talk about quite a bit in this unit, or this chapter, is the timeline about how our entry on December 8th of 1941 did not bring an automatic end to the war, And people just didn't go like, oh my gosh, they're here now, we got to quit. It's not exactly how it worked. So, but we like to think it is because, I mean, honestly, the United States is great. However, yeah, so are other countries. And I don't know, I'm somewhere between the last two presidents on American exceptionalism. So, yeah. All right. I'm revealing it's not political philosophy, but some ideology. Oh, sorry for the yawn. All right. So, the US begins the decade 30s with a policy of isolationism. Now, it's really more military, political isolationism, not so much economic. If somebody wants to buy stuff from us, we'd really like for them to buy it. It is, after all, the Great Depression. So if there's something that we can do to improve the economy, we want to do it. However, it is going to change our foreign policy, and there's a discussion of that, excuse me, at the beginning of the you may or may not remember the Roosevelt corollary. That's what I'm leaning over. I got bitten by I don't need to tell you that. Fire ant bit me in the ankle yesterday. So there you go. Too much information. Apologies. We had followed the Roosevelt corollary for a while, which essentially meant if we feel like intervening in your country because you're not doing stuff right, we're going to do it. In the 30s, we're either more enlightened or more broke. It's probably both. So we decide that we're not going to do that anymore. So we repudiate the Roosevelt corollary and instead join in with the good neighbor policy, which essentially means if you ask us for help, we might do it. However, we're not going to invade your country. And again, maybe because we're more enlightened, could also be because we're broke. So Cuba will repeal the Platt Amendment, which says that we can come in whenever we feel like it. And I know you're probably thinking, well, this means that there's going to be more independence and more separation between the United States and Latin American countries. And then, oops, that's not exactly how it works. But it's not, I think in theory, that's how it's supposed to work. It doesn't work that way because World War II. And there's going to be kind of an unofficial alliance in the Western Hemisphere with the United States and the Allies in World War II, with some possible exceptions in Argentina and Chile, perhaps, where maybe some people will flee to after the war ends. But there's going to be a really strong economic connection between all of these countries. When we become the arsenal of democracy, we're going to need some natural resources to help with the arsenal of democracy. Now, unlike Germany or Japan, where our country's large enough that we pretty much have all the stuff we need. It's not that we're completely devoid of natural resources, but if we can use somebody else's, we're not opposed to that. So, kind of one of those things. All right, so we're isolated. We're officially out of other people's business, but economically, our ties are going to become stronger. And there's going to be stronger economic dependence between Latin America and the United States. And that will continue to be true until maybe a revolution in Cuba and some other stuff that happens a little later after the Cold War begins. So after World War II. All right, so good neighbor policy, repudiation of Roosevelt corollary, repeal of the Platt Amendment. Now, other stuff that's going on in the world, we're really not we're not intervening in. So when the Germans start to take over their neighbors, we stay out. We may issue a statement that says you shouldn't be doing that, but we're going to stay out. When Japan takes over Manchuria, in a region in China that's filled with natural resources, and they start to build railroads there and do, things that people who don't own the place shouldn't do, we're also going to stay out. And China had traditionally been our ally, so us staying out of that going to be a huge frustration to China. And it's going to eventually lead to a revolution there, is what I hear. And Francisco Franco is going to overthrow a democratically elected government in Spain. And you'll see it's like 5,000 or 6,000 Americans go over and volunteer to fight on behalf of the democratically elected regime in Spain. And that group calls themselves the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. So there are books written about that if you're vaguely interested in that for your book review. Germany is going to invade their neighbors. Italy is going to invade Ethiopia. And the US, Great Britain, and France, kind of the big three of the Western countries, will stay out of it. The Soviet Union, which is certainly a big, important country, also stays out of it and signs a secret deal with Germany, which we will talk about here in a minute. All right. So, you know, it's a US history class, so much of what we talk about regarding World War II is going to have to deal with US participation in World War II. We'll kind of hit the general, why did the war start, but that's not the main focus of what we do, because, you know, wrong class. You'll have another class where they do that, the European history, or I don't know, world civilizations. I don't know what they call the college class anymore because I don't teach it. I haven't taken it. I did, yeah, I taught it in high school. It was, no, what I taught in high school was AP European history. Yeah, I didn't teach world history. That was 10,000 years. Who needs that? Oh, we all need that. I'm kidding. I'm sorry. All right. World War II in Europe. This really begins when Hitler starts taking over the neighbors. Now, it doesn't officially begin, I know, doesn't officially begin until September of 38. I'm aware of this, I promise. But Germany invades the Rhineland. This is a region that had been given to France in the Treaty of Versailles. So Germany says, not fair, and they take it back. Now, France is not in the position economically, militarily, to do anything about it, and England is not going to defend this either. So the Nazis are the National Socialist Party. They don't behave in the way that a modern democratic socialist party would behave. They eliminate their opponents and consolidate offices and take away people's freedom. I know, goodness, I know some of you, I get it, some of you are more liberal, more conservative, and some of you go, no, that's exactly what, but not in the same, I mean, no matter what your belief is, I can't imagine that any of you truly think, no matter what your political rhetoric might be, I can't imagine that any of you truly think that Joe Biden or Donald Trump, either of them, are really like Hitler. You can think that if you like, but I'm guessing you don't really think that, even if you say that. I think, you know, this is a whole different kind of group of folks, and they're so extreme that it's beyond extreme. I mean, they're totalitarian, they're fascist in some ways. I know don't get upset with me. I know they're not technically fascist. I know that was Mussolini, but their behavior, I mean, Hitler's leadership is clearly totalitarian. But anyway, back to business. But they do have this kind of general idea that the state is everything, the individual is nothing. So it's really not that much of a stretch for them to start eliminating individual rights. And they're going to take over territories that they think are rightfully theirs at first. So that includes the Rhineland, the Sudetenland, the German-speaking region of Czechoslovakia, Austria, because at some point part of that land had been part of what was pre-Germany, and certainly Hitler's roots were Austrian. So if you disagree with Hitler, you're going to jail, you're going to have your stuff confiscated, you're going to go to a work camp, you're eventually going to go to a concentration camp. So if you're a certain group of people that disagree with them, so dissidents or certain ethnic minorities, primarily Jews, then you're going to have your individual rights, eventually your property and your life taken away. The U.S. is going to pass neutrality acts as we saw the conflict developing in 1935 to make sure that everybody knew we are not getting involved. Now, our friends in England and France really wanted us to get involved as they got more involved and support them. And we said that we weren't going to. So 35, 36-ish, we are selling stuff to both sides. Primary company that sells a lot of stuff to Germany, there's more than one, but Ford Motor Company sells a lot of stuff to Germany to help with anything that needs an engine. And Henry Ford will end up getting civilian awards from the Nazi government. So that's going to be a problem for him and his company historically. I mean, it is. People will look at that and go like, oh my goodness, that is bad stuff. They say something much stronger, of course. Oh, excuse me for the yawn. So we passed neutrality acts. We really try to stay out of stuff, selling to both sides. In 1938, Germans and Soviets signed a non-aggression treaty, sometimes called the Nazi-Soviet Pact. And the purpose of this on the surface is so that these two countries will agree not to fight with each other. It's exactly what it says it is on the surface. Behind the surface, so the secret clause of this treaty says that Germany is going to invade Poland. Now, traditionally, the people who lived in Poland were people that the former Russian government, the Soviet government, would have defended. So these are people who are Slavs, Croats, people from ethnic groups that would be within Russia or now the Soviet Union. So in World War I terms, they would have gone in on their side. So what Germany told or agreed to with Russia was that if they invaded Poland, that the Soviets would stay out of it and they could have the eastern side and the Germans would take the western side. So they agreed to split Poland as long as the Soviets remained neutral in World War II. So that's the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression treaty of 38. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Then Germany starts to invade some more neighbors. They take over parts of Austria, part of Czechoslovakia, and then when they invade Poland in 38, that's what officially starts the war. A few months before that happened, England and France signed a Munich Pact, which is another sort of kind of non-aggression treaty, where it's sometimes called, I think it's called a tripartite pact, but not the tripartite pact, which is more of a World War I thing. But England, France, and Germany agree that Germany had the right to take the lands they had already taken and that they would agree not to take any more. So they just said, Hitler, stop taking over the neighbors. And Hitler said, okay, as long as I get to keep what we already took. And France and England go, yeah, that's cool with us because you didn't take any of our stuff. And when the French and English politicians come home, they proclaim that they have found peace in their time. And I think that, you know, the most famous picture is with Neville Chamberlain holding up the Peace in Our Time newspaper and saying that, you know, he had stopped the war, the spread of the conflict. And the opposition party, led by Winston Churchill, said, no, all you've done is appease someone. This is just appeasement, and it's not going to stop him. So a few months later, like 10 or 12, it's about 10 months later, when Poland is invaded, and Poland's invaded September 1 of 39, and then England and France declare war on Germany on September 3, 39. So it's very clear Hitler goes home and then just declares the next countries that his country will invade, makes a plan with the Reichstag, which is the parliament or Congress legislature of the German people. So it's clear that Hitler's goal here was just to get a little more time, which is what he got. So Once the invasion of Poland happens, the war is officially on in September of 1939. It really doesn't slow down the German assault because they certainly had a head start. They knew where they were going. Their military had been built up. And part of the reason their economy improved is that they did a whole lot of spending to build up the military and to build up the infrastructure. So they did some of that deficit spending that Keynes had recommended. I'm not saying that, that their purpose was good. I'm saying that you see that in a pretty full measure in Germany. And I'm not trying to argue anything at all. I'm just trying to say that their economy seems to improve pretty quickly because of that spending, but also I do recognize this because they take over other countries and take their stuff. I get that too. Keynes did not suggest that. Nobody suggested that. However, you may know people and you may have read articles from people who suggest that people were government leaders, country leaders, were excited about World War II because they knew it would bring them out of the Great Depression. And certainly there's a kind of a rogue school of historians, I don't even know that they're official historians, who think that FDR allowed the United States to be attacked so that we could participate in World War II and it would improve our economy. There's really no good evidence of such a thing, but the lack of good evidence doesn't always stop people from believing things. So if you've heard that before, and you might be able to read articles that suggest that. It doesn't mean that they're using their sources properly, my opinion. But anybody who says that what ends the Great Depression for the United States is participation in World War II, yeah, that's probably true. That part is probably true. But what is it your math teachers like to say? Correlation is not causation. Do your math teachers say that? I think maybe your history teachers say it too. I think I just said it. All right. So back to our main purpose. What's going on in the United States during this time period? Okay. We're officially neutral. When the war starts, we're officially neutral. But we've started to change some of our policies about who we sell to and how. So we'll talk about those. Stat teachers. That's right, it's stat teachers. That's right. I did not associate with those people. They were on the whole other side of the building when I taught high school. They weren't right. Stat teacher. I want to say that was that. I don't remember that guy's name. Van something. Can't remember. Oh well, because I didn't talk to them enough. Actually, the math teachers were very nice. You know who wasn't very nice was World War II. So we're going to try to stay out of it because we don't want to be drawn into another world war the same way we were with World War I, which was somebody kept sinking our ships. So our official trade policies, if you want to buy stuff from us and we know you need it because you can't make it yourself, you got to come pick it up. So cash and carry is what they call that policy. So we don't deliver and we don't extend credit. So as the war began, you got to pay for stuff if you want it. Really only two countries could still pay for stuff at that point. That would be Germany and England. And yes, we did sell to both of them. However, FDR runs for a third term because we're in the middle of a global conflict. And we elect him, and then he pretty quickly changes to the idea that we're not going to be neutral. And of course, by 39, which is right before the election, because he gets reelected in 40, the war has already officially started. So we are not nearly as neutral by the time FDR gets to the third term. So we go from cash and carry to lend lease right after FDR gets elected for the third term. Lend lease is where we know you can't afford the stuff, so we will lend it to you in exchange for a lease of land where we can build a military base, and we will have that lease for 99 years. Not sure why we like to do leases for 99 instead of 100 years, but that is kind of a foreign policy tradition. So this is a sign that we intend to enter military conflict, and we'd like to establish a base of operations much closer to where the conflict is going to be. And most of these bases are in Europe. So England, France, and then eventually Germany, but of course not with the Lend-Lease policy. The Germans are definitely not, that they're not participating in that. There'll be a senator. Who is it? It's one of the Tafts. Maybe it's Robert Taft, I think, maybe. But it's the Taft family is really big into politics in Ohio. You've already seen the William Howard Taft as president. But he says that Lend-Lease is like loaning somebody chewing gum. When they're done with it, you don't want it back. So, it's an interesting comment on the idea that we really did not expect the material, the war stuff that we loaned to somebody. We don't expect it back. So we know what's going on there. And FDR will win re-election and in 40 and declare the U.S. that thing right there, arsenal of democracy. All right, I feel like I need to mention why 3 terms, actually 4, because he gets elected again, but I know he doesn't serve the whole term, but why 3 terms is okay for FDR, but it's not okay for Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. I know some of you are going like, does she not know there's an amendment? Yes, I know there's an amendment, but I'm trying to tell you that during this time period, there was not. So no amendment. I think it's a 25. I think it's a 25th amendment that limits you to 2 terms or 1 and slightly over half. So they actually count out the number of days that you can be president. So if you serve less than half of somebody else's term, you can have 2 of your own, like if the vice president takes over. If you have more than half of the previous president's term, then you only get 1 of your own. Now, before this, just nobody had been president more than twice. And do you know why? How we know why, but we're not telling you. Fine. I say it has something to do with George Washington. That's what I say. He had set the precedent or the trend of only being president twice, because we would have elected George Washington until the day he died, and maybe even after, because we liked him. He was the founding father. He was the father of our country, father of independence. We loved him. He was nature's noble man. He was a lot of really cool things. We thought, I know he wasn't perfect. Some of you are like, you know this about him, and I know some stuff about him that's not perfect. But for the time period and, compared to his contemporaries, he was a pretty selfless leader. So we liked him. We would have kept him as long as possible. However, after 2 terms, he said, I'm going home. I'm done. This is supposed to be, like a citizen government. You're not supposed to stay the whole time. So he kind of self-limited his term. Because of that precedent of only serving 2 terms as president, no one had really done that before or since then. I think Cleveland would have, because he was Cleveland. And Wilson thought about running for a 3rd term. But the American public wasn't okay with Cleveland 3 times. I mean, he did run 3 times. He got elected 2. And then, but I know the time he didn't win was in the middle. And Wilson was honestly too ill to run for that 3rd term, even though he wanted to. So FDR says, we're in the middle of turmoil. It's a really tough time in the world. A war just started. Do you really want a new president in the middle of all this foolishness? And the American public said, no, we really don't. And FDR had led us through the Great Depression and had made a declaration of war. So we were okay with him kind of following through to the end on this. So we elect FDR for term number 3, and then eventually we will elect him to term number 4. Now we add that constitutional amendment that limits you to 2 terms after FDR's 4th term, after he gets elected to the 4th term. as you can imagine, the not FDR party, the Republicans, excuse me, FDR was a Democrat, are the party that really pushes for that amendment because, they're thinking if FDR hadn't died, he would have been president the same way that Washington could have for the rest of his life because he was fairly popular. I know not completely, and I know there was a pretty strong challenge to his presidency in the second term. However, FDR, kind of an icon during that time period. So, all right, FDR wins re-election, quickly refers to the U.S. as the arsenal of democracy. So this is the idea that at the very least, we are going to supply everything that the Allies need to win the war effort. And then we initiate Lend-Lease. Great Britain is broke. Yeah, they can't buy any more stuff. Also, Japan had a lot of investments in the U.S. in stocks and bonds and that kind of stuff. So the United States decides that they're going to freeze all Japanese assets, so corporate, national, that sort of thing. And the reason we do that is Japan needs the money to buy aviation fuel and scrap metal for their army and their navy. And, their Army Air Corps and their Navy. And they don't have natural resources to get those things on their own. And those are not things they can get from Manchuria, which they've taken over, or Korea, which they've taken over, or the Philippines, which they've taken, all the places they've taken over. So Japan tells us if we freeze their assets, that they're going to attack us. And we believe them. We just don't think they'll attack Hawaii. We really thought they'd attack the Philippines, which they'll do as well. But they attack Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and that, of course, leads to a U.S. declaration of war. When FDR asked for that declaration of war, he gives a speech where he says December 7th, 1941, a date, or the date, I can't remember. I think he says a date that will live in infamy. Now, also, I always like to point out, this is a sign that you should always make more than one draft of your whatever when you can. And I point this out in History 1 as well, because Thomas Jefferson did not submit his first draft of the Declaration of Independence. FDR did not use his first draft of this speech. You can see the write-up of it with crossing out. And he initially called December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in world history. See, infamy way better. This is why we edit stuff. Yeah, okay. So Japan's purpose at Pearl Harbor is they thought that most of our aircraft carriers for the Pacific Fleet would be in the harbor and that they could destroy all of them. For whatever reason, they were out maneuvers doing something. They weren't there. Now, that doesn't mean that the ships that were destroyed there and the many lives that were lost, it was tragic stuff. And if you've been to the museum there, I have not. I've not been to Pearl Harbor, but somebody in the last class had, and people talk about just how stunning and overwhelming and sad it is, and I'm sure that it is. But it's one of those terrible, could have been a lot worse sort of things strategically. And while Japan was pretty, I was going to say nationalistically proud of their actions, I know one of their admirals, it was the Yamamoto, said pretty famously later on, all we have done is awaken a sleeping giant. So his position was this was a bad idea, because it's going to get us involved, and they were better off with us out of the war, which probably is true. I don't know when the United States would have decided to get involved if they hadn't gotten involved then. It looked like we were headed that way clearly, but we were headed that way pretty slowly. Not so much because FDR didn't think joining the war effort was a bad idea. He just knew he had to have the American public behind the war effort, and they weren't even, when we did. It was kind of iffy even when we declared war, except you were so excited about Pearl Harbor. And then right after, upset. And then after Pearl Harbor, really the tide turns, for sure. And you'll see a lot of anti-Japanese stuff, which we'll talk about too. Would, you know, oh gosh, would Japan still be powerful if they didn't bomb Pearl Harbor? Goodness. That's probably the answer to that question is probably more controversial than you think, because some of the people that argue no would argue that what made Japan important in the modern era, this is rough, but I'm going to say it out loud, is that the United States rebuilt it. Of course, you know what we did right before we rebuilt it. Um, and that's kind of a weirdly controversial, it's a much more controversial question than you think. I think, you know, Japan had already modernized their navy, and they didn't have the natural resources they needed to be powerful on the same scale as the Soviet Union or the United States. If they'd been left alone to take over more of China, you know, especially the rural parts of China where you can find natural resources, because China is enormous. Japan clearly is not. You've seen it on the map. I think they would have been powerful either way, to be honest. But if Japanese aggression in China had been stopped, that was going to limit their power, unless they decided that they would partner with China and they would sell stuff to each other. And then probably the Japan-China partnership would rule the world. I don't know. But the people who would argue no often would say the only reason Japan became a world economic power is because the United States protected them militarily. They don't have to, they're not allowed to spend money on the military. And two, we rebuilt everything after we destroyed it. I'm aware of this, but completely modernized their country. So that's a very, you know, very US interpretation of the answer if you want to go with no. But there's so many possibilities of what Japan could have done to get the natural resources they needed, which could have been, you know, military engagement or some sort of economic partnership. But I think also Japan and China in partnership during that era is unlikely. They had been mortal enemies, it seems, for all of history. So them working together on stuff is unlikely. And you see how, you know, the China, Hong Kong, Taiwan thing is going. So, or maybe you don't. I don't know how much attention you pay to stuff like that. But China's not really very collaborative still. It's going to be my understatement of the day. All right. Okay. I hope that was kind of an answer. So it was kind of an answer. All right. So it's my disclaimer about World War II. If you like studying World War II, military history, weapons, that kind of stuff, yeah, I'm not your girl on that for a couple of reasons. One, I'm not going to lie, my knowledge of military history is not the strongest part of my study of US history. I don't know if that goes with sexist reasons, maybe that I just never had much interest in weaponry, that sort of, I'm so sorry. Yeah, it's just the truth. And here's the other reason, it's US History Survey class. So if you get the chance, if you're one of those people for an elective, take a military history class and you'll be so happy, because those are only taught by people that really like that stuff. One of the things that's tricky, I'm going to say stuff, hopefully it's not terribly controversial. I don't know if you've noticed, I don't know that it's as true at a place like ACC as it might be when you transfer to UT or A&M or Texas State or Texas Tech. Sorry, I didn't mean to leave that out. Or wherever you transfer to, there's so many lovely schools that you can transfer. History departments might be slightly more liberal than conservative. So finding a university where there's going to be a nice elective in military history might be a little limited. I know, I would assume, I'm making assumptions, A&M, just, you know, because they would probably have some good classes in that. When I went to Angelo State, Mecca of knowledge, as it is known, because we had so many people who served in the Pentagon there, because it's right next to a military base. A lot of those guys would retire and then come be professors. Military history there was really good. I just, you know, sorry, it just wasn't my thing. I had a couple of classes, and my favorite professor there had been a Pentagon advisor during the Cold War era. So yeah, that was really useful. But military history, there's lots of good online stuff about military history because, you know, lots of dudes served in the military and they like history. So, and women too. I have female friends who served in the military who really love military history. It's just not my thing. That's so many disclaimers. I'm going to keep going. But I did add a link to a timeline which goes over some of the military stuff, which I'm going to try to share with you at this moment. We'll see how this goes. Cried. I'm looking for the right thing. I think it's this one, but if I'm wrong, I hope it's not something that, there's nothing inappropriate that I've been searching, but I did have to update something recently. Crud, that's the same thing, isn't it? Try again. Dang it. Lecture notes. Dang. Huh. All right. Fine. Let me just click on the link. Then I'll open it and we'll share it. Okay. We go. So sorry. Still slow at this. All right. So, this World War II timeline from historyonthenet.com, World War II, looked pretty good to me, so I put it on there. And then you can read about Scott, who made the timeline. See if you like his historical background. I do think it is probably important for you when you look at history sources online. I know, you just go to Wikipedia anyway. I know you don't care what I'm going to say, but I think it's kind of important that when you look at history sources, that they maybe are written by people who like history and have studied history and have a background in history. Because, I mean, you already know, you can take any bit of information and twist it however you think you need to twist it to make your point. But anyway, so this is just a really basic timeline, but it's thorough. It's really thorough and starts back in 38 and goes through all kinds of stuff. Plus you get some ads there that tell you what happens that led to different people, different countries joining the war, important invasions or battles that changed the course of the war, that sort of thing. So you will see really important stuff, I think. It's not everything, but it's a pretty thorough timeline. So if you wonder, like, what happened? When did it happen? How did it affect things? I think this timeline is good. It's my opinion. You don't have to agree. I just put it there as a resource. Okay. All right. Before we kind of go back to the notes for a sec, not much longer. I know we're getting close to being out of time. Do you guys have any questions you want to ask? And next time we'll talk more about battle stuff and then maybe the weekly question as well. And by then, hopefully I'll have thought a little bit more about the quiz for next time. Oh, the other thing I forgot to tell you, I know I just asked if you had any questions and then didn't let you ask any, but please do. I will create a survey about the last quiz. I didn't do it, but I'll do it today and post it. It'll just be like 2 or 3 questions. Did you prefer the longer, the shorter quiz? Did you think the review was useful? Do you have any concerns? That sort of thing. Some of you have emailed me about it, so I already know you have a few concerns. But what I'm trying to decide is, do we prefer the longer or shorter quiz? And your survey answers will tell me that. You guys were pretty definitive on the first one, so I appreciate that. All right. You guys have any questions about anything thus far? I'm going to go with no. All right, fine. Back to the notes. And all I'm going to do is just show you what's coming, and then we'll talk about what's coming next time. So in my excitement, of learning how to embed charts. Oh my gosh, hard being old sometimes. Get excited about the smallest stuff. Um, I made an Atlantic theater chart and Pacific theater. Sometimes historians divide World War II battles into Atlantic and Pacific, so primarily European stuff, Northern Africa as well, I know. And then primarily Pacific stuff, which is Japan, China stuff, so Asian stuff. Most and well, not just Asian, but Australian, New Zealand, that region of the world. One of the things that you'll notice is the U.S. enters the war in 1941. The war starts in 1939. Battles that you see, really intense battles between the Allies and the Axis powers. Allies, we always think of them as the good guys because we're in it, but England, France, Soviet Union, United States, and then Italy at the end, and some other smaller countries that we care about, but you know. And then the Axis powers are Germany, Japan, and Italy until the end, where they switch sides, which is what Italy does in both wars. There aren't any real battles between the two alliances until later, because the Allies don't fight, they really don't fight back in a meaningful way. Individual countries do. I'm not suggesting they didn't. And you don't really see the tide turning in these battles for a couple of years to where the Allies actually start to make changes. So the charts really start with Allied battles where the Allies start to make improvements, not where they just get beaten badly consistently, which is what you see for quite a while. One of the things you'll notice too when you look through here are some of the names of maybe important generals or admirals. If you decide you want to read a book about any of those people and it's related to the United States, like certainly General Patton is a US general. MacArthur is from the US, Eisenhower is from the US. Or if you decide you want to read about a specific battle and the importance of that battle, I could live with that as a book review. What I really want you to do as far as book reviews is something that's really interesting to you. And the other requirement that I want, of course, is that it has something to do with US history. There's always, always, always somebody that wants to read about the Holocaust as well, because there just is, or somebody who wants to read a bio of Hitler. You are not going to find a connection between Hitler and the United States other than we entered a war that he started. And so Hitler's biography, I'm going to always go with a hard no on that. As far as Holocaust books, that one's tricky because there are very few Holocaust books that really directly involve people from the United States. So I will type into the chat because, I don't think, I can't remember if I put this on the book list, but I'll type into the chat a Holocaust book that I'm okay with. And if you have other ones, if that's your thing and that's what you want to read about, you can ask. But if there's not a US connection, I'm probably going to say no. But this one's called All But My Life. See if I can type that. Worst typist ever. And it's by, and I may misspell her name because that's just the way I roll, Gerda Weissman Klein. And the reason that I think this one is okay is because she lived in the US after being in a concentration camp. She was German woman, German Jewish woman, and her family got put in concentration camp. She lived through the experience. When the concentration camp was liberated by US Army, the first soldier she met was a guy named Kurt Klein. And I think it might be, I think I spelled it wrong. I think it's that. But when she ends up marrying him and then coming to the United States and then talking about her experiences, she makes a short biographical film about it that becomes pretty trendy in the 90s, I think, because I got to go to a couple of conferences where she spoke, and it's incredibly moving. I mean, it's historically important, but it's incredibly moving, as you might imagine. And I think she won whatever you win for films, maybe an Oscar for her short film. So it's really moderately interesting. All right, I've clearly talked too long. It's almost time to go. So let me double check on the roll. I'm going to say again one more time. These are the people that I didn't see here present today. So if you're one of those people, either shout it out or type it in the chat, okay? So I did not see, let me make sure I have the right roll. I do. Victoria Alvarez, Kevin Bakos, Isaiah Castilla, sorry, my ink there is smudged. Eric Constantino, Ethan Contreras, Miracle Curry, excuse me, Catherine Hawkins. I think everybody else is here. Okay, so if you're any of those people, let me know. Otherwise, I think you're not here. Stay and ask questions if you have them. Otherwise, feel free to go. Have a lovely day. Thank you for coming. Always appreciate seeing you, kind of seeing you. Some of you I see. Some of you is like a shooting star or something. Some of you send your dog. Whatever works. You guys have a good day. But yeah, you guys all stay safe as well. Ask questions if you have them, please. Hopefully I did not offend anyone politically today. That was not my goal. Thank you. You guys have a good day. Take care of yourselves. Thanks for coming. Thank you. Come again on Thursday, perhaps? Yes. Are you asking?
Okay, so yes, on the weekly questions from last week, when I submitted it, I think I submitted 19 on 18 and 18 on 19. And when I tried to like resubmit it, it wouldn't let me do it again.
Okay. I'll try to remember that when I'm grading. And if I have any questions, because I clearly haven't gotten to yours yet. So if I have any questions, I promise I'll send an email. But thanks for letting me know. I appreciate it. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, guys, any other questions? Oh, I forgot to stop recording.